Hello everybody and welcome back to Comet Sighted. We are going to be discussing Dev Diary number 21 for Imperator Rome today, and there was no Dev Diary last week. I did not skip one. We skipped a week because of illness, not because of my illness, because of the illness in the dev team. And what I love about this one is that it starts with this glorious artwork here. And I was looking over the artwork, and what I liked most about it is that it had some pretty accurate depictions of Roman equipment, which in a lot of modern media you don't see, like the armor that the Roman soldiers here are wearing is the Lorica Hamata, not the Lorica Segmentata. The segmented armor were those overlapping plates that you usually see in movies, where it was, solid steel plates overlapping each other. But for most of, the Roman Republic, they used a suit of chainmail, basically, and hamata comes from the Latin for hooked. And I noticed that in the background, you can actually see Roman spearmen in Roman in Roman gear. It wasn't just these aren't just auxiliaries in the back there. These are triarii, and triarii I wasn't sure. I actually had to look that up because I didn't know the exact time period that they were used. I know they were used from early, in the early Republican era, but they were used up to about, one or two generations right before, the famous Caesar's time. So yeah, that is accurate as well, the triarii in the background. And this is a very rough battle for these legionaries here if the triarii are fighting on the front lines here. But anyway, enough of me gushing about the fact that they got a couple things right here. And this pila looks very accurate to me. Very accurate indeed. I don't know about the head could be that large. It seems a little large to me, but it very well could have been that large. I've seen pictures of some of them that were this big before. But anywho, aside from that, we're talking about combat today. Combat in Imperator occurs when two armies are in the same city. And again, I'm trying to paraphrase here for English. The army first in the city is considered the defender unless the other side has control over fortifications in the province. That is how current EU4 works. So that's going to be familiar to many players. The battlefields have 60 different positions on each side, as well as reserves where the cohorts currently not fighting will be. Armies will be organized with infantry in the middle, cavalry on the flanks, and ranged support in the back line when possible. Again, very familiar to EU4 players. Each day, each unit will fire on one target in front of them or towards the side if they have enough flanking ability. Damage is determined by adding up the dice with the combat modifiers for terrain and leaders, where a total of 0 gives 2% total damage, and a maximum of 15 from terrain and dice gives 30% damage. So each point's an additional 2%, it looks like. The impact of dice rolls on battle is far less in Imperator than games like Vicky 2, EU4, and CK2, as the dice range is smaller, with just a d6 being rolled rather than the usual d10, or in EU4, if you're familiar with that. Siege battles go up to a d14. So I'm not sure how I feel about that. I mean, I usually have horrible luck and roll constant zeros. I mean, that's another thing to remember, is that in combat, in combat, it's not, it's not a D10. It's technically, it would be a D11 because 0 is a valid roll on it. So that's a little off. So that's something to worry about too. Is it a D6 or D7 are we talking about here? Because in all the other games, 0 is a valid roll. All right, so the rest of this is going to be pretty standard, again, for people who've played CK2 or EU4. Crossing a river or doing a naval landing gives -1 to the attacker. Mountains give +2 to the defender. Hills, marshes, I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be, and forests give +1 to the defender. Leader impacts combat as well, with the difference in martial giving a bonus to 1 with the higher martial, EU4. When the damage value is modified by the following before being applied to the target, please note that all damage is done after the round of combat is calculated, so it's not beneficial to fire first. Interesting. If you are firing from the back line, you're basically at 50% efficiency, so they're doing half damage. Attacking units' discipline is a positive modifier for damage, and this discipline can either be the country or individual modifiers of discipline down to the cohort. The loyal regiments will do slightly more damage. That's good to know. So discipline's an important thing, and the discipline can be countrywide modifiers, or it could be individual modifiers, or it could just be cohort modifiers. Loyalty impacts discipline. Each type of unit can also have bonuses for fighting better or worse when doing damage or receiving damage, and also for fighting in certain terrains. Of course, they can also have generic bonuses that make them overall better or worse. That is something we have covered in the past. Very specifically, certain like culture groups can be very good and very bad at fighting in specific terrains. Like if I remember correctly, up in England, in Northern Europe, I can't remember what that culture group is actually called in this. I'd have to go back and look. But it could be very, very specifically good at fighting in hills and very effective in forests. Some units will perform better versus other unit types. Again, that's something we saw in the past, where chariots are very good versus light infantry, but bad versus heavy infantry. And then the comparison of combat tactics between the opposing forces. The experienced unit reduces how much damage that unit takes, so an experienced unit takes less damage. Then this damage is multiplied by a value to scale damage, so combat lasts over a desired amount of ticks. Okay. All right, now for the interesting part, because all of that was basically copy and pasted from other Paradox games, which is fine, because if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of situation. One of the major difference makers in combat are the tactics. For each army, you can determine a defensive and an offensive tactic, where each one is great versus another one. So it's basically a rock, paper, scissors situation. The offensive tactic is used when you're the attacker. The defensive tactic is used when you are the defender. Pretty obvious there. But that is going to be very interesting. The ability to pick the offensive and the defensive tactics that your armies use in combat, that's going to be interesting. And here we have all of the offensive tactics we currently have to work out. So, all-out assault, 30% versus withdrawal, 20% versus probing counterattack, minus 20% versus hard defense. Both sides take 10% extra casualties. So this looks like you're basically saying we're sending everybody in. So you do extra damage versus a retreating enemy. You do extra damage when you're counterattacking. But if they have really, it looks like if they have a lot of heavy infantry, you're going to do worse against them because they'll be able to take that, and your flanks are going to take extra casualties. Frontal assault, 20% versus withdrawal, 10% versus probing counterattack, minus 10% versus hard defense. That seems like a scaled back version of all-out assault. You're just kind of, that seems like a kind of basic one. We have an outflanking attack, 10% versus strong counterattack, minus 10% versus mobile defense. All right, that makes sense. Echelon attack, 10% versus mobile defense, minus 10% versus probing counterattack. So that's an inverse of the outflanking attack. Probing attack, minus 10% versus strong counterattack, 10% versus hard defense. Both sides take 25% less casualties. So that's, yeah, that one's, you're just kind of hitting them here and there and kind of sussing out what's going on. And here we have our defensive tactics. Strong counterattack. So we saw some of these, yeah. So when we see strong counterattack and stuff like that, we see those up here. It's, it's taking this and adding it to that. So that's 10% versus probing attack, minus 10% versus outflanking, probing attack, 10% versus echelon, minus 10 all-out assault and frontal assault, hard defense, 10% against all-out assault, 10% against frontal attack. Yeah, so like hard defense is really good against the heavy assaults. That's what that's saying. Mobile defense, outflanking, increase against outflanking, decrease against echelon, and withdrawal. Both sides take 25% less casualties. So if you're on withdrawal, I think that's going to be an interesting one. If you put that on your defensive tactic, there's a good chance that you just pull back from bat. Basically, you guys fight, but you're trying to conserve manpower and leave the battlefield. But if you're on withdrawal and they're on all-out assault, you're going to be taking some pretty heavy casualties. That's going to be very interesting. I really, really like what I'm seeing here. Obviously, I would like to see more of these. Right now, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 of each. I think we could definitely use a little bit more here. I see a little bit more room for some wiggle in there for heavy, what is it called when I think it was Frederick the Great did it? Like oblique attacks, where you basically concentrate your forces on one flank to try. So if you're outnumbered, you could have local superiority, try to defeat the enemy kind of piecemeal, that kind of thing. you know, heavy flanking attacks or things like that. I see a little bit more room for expansion here, but this is very interesting. I like that you choose which of these you're going to be using, and all of these modifiers. There's so many modifiers in Imperator, especially when it comes time to combat. So you can, it seems like it's going to be kind of like the opposite of CK2. And in CK2, a lot of times there's, for a lot of players at least, I know some players who understand what's going on behind the scenes a little more can kind of suss it out a little difference. A lot of players in CK2s just look at the numbers, and then sometimes they look at the troop type to kind of determine if they think they're going to win a battle or not. And it's just like, okay, I've got this many, they've got this many, it's neutral terrain, let's fight here, and hopefully I roll good. But in this, it seems like it's kind of the other way. There's so many modifiers that you can personally manage, and you're going to be able to very specifically tailor your combat units to the way you want to fight, which I think, I keep coming back to this point, is I think it's going to be it's going to be cool in single-player game, but it's going to be game-changing in multiplayer games. When you're playing against another person who can really stack those modifiers the way they want to, I just think that's going to be like a fascinating case study in human behavior when it comes time to playing big multiplayer games with this. And that's definitely what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be hosting big multiplayer games for Imperator Rome, and hopefully it's stable and we can run with like 20+ people. It seems very interesting. That's what I'm going to put it down to. I really like what I'm seeing here. So you guys let me know what you think. Leave those comments down below, and we will discuss, and I will see you all next time.